this Tuesday, April 7th, 2026. A few housekeeping items to start out with. Says the board may, again, ask some questions of each appeal. You know how the process probably works because some of you have been here before. We're going to have the applicant come up. They're going to present their case. The board can ask questions, so can the assessor. Then she's going to present their case. Same thing holds true. We can ask questions and whatever. When we're done, we'll close the public participation unless there's anybody else from the public that wants to make any comments. And then we will go into our deliberation and hopefully try to come to a decision this evening. We don't have to, but that's what we try to do, okay? So that's kind of the plan with that. A couple other housekeeping things I wanted to touch base with. So, you know, if the board fails to come up with a decision in 60 days, you know, unless the applicant agrees in writing for the delay, the applicant is deemed to be denied, and then of course you can appeal our decision to the Supreme Court. Okay, so there's another step if you so choose to do that, and we needed to make sure that we mentioned that. We need to call a roll call of who's here from the board. Jeffrey Crane. Here. Peter Coyne. Here. David Sill. Here. Alex Coop is absent. We gave him an excused day off tonight. And then my name is Ed Getty, and I'm the chairman of the committee so far. We need to approve the minutes from our previous meeting on August 20th. Could I have a motion to approve those?
Make a motion we approve the minutes from the August 20th, 2025 meeting.
Second.
Second by Peter. All in favor? Thank you. Next, we have some more new business as the annual appointment of the chair and secretary of the board. I would like to nominate Jeffrey Crane to continue as the secretary, unless he has violent objections to that. You've done such a wonderful job.
I second that motion.
Okay. All in favor of deputy and secretary? Great.
No violent objections.
Oh, no violent objection, all right. Then we need to deal with the chairman. I'm more than happy if anybody would like to step forward and pass the baton we only have two other choices today. So do you express any interest to do that?
I don't.
I'm happy with you serving. If you're willing to serve as chair, I'm happy to have you serve as chair.
I guess we'll just continue that way. So you place my name in nomination.
A motion that retain Edward Getty as chair.
Second.
Second, all in favor? Okay, no change, so you get to listen to us for another year, I guess. So.
One other housekeeping matter,
Yes.
The rules that we have were last updated in 2010, and so Jim and his staff have kind of circulated some revisions, and because of my background, they wanted me to kind of do a look-see before we send them to the board to look-see, and which we'll look at a meeting and update as appropriate, just because there's some, they're fine, but they can be tweaked a little bit. So that when we have our next meeting, whenever that may be, one of the agenda items may be just to kind of review and discuss some draft rules.
Let's do that.
Yeah, that sounds great.
Definitely. That sounds good to everybody by consensus, and we'll make sure Catherine knows that to add that. Good idea. Okay. So we have basically two appeals to get to tonight, and we're going to do those first. That'll be next on our agenda. So our first appeal is for 22 Zakelo Island Road in Harrison. Paul and Tony Good, if you want to come up here and present your case to the board. We appreciate that. And can everybody hear me in the back? So I have one of those voices that usually travels. So, welcome.
Thank you. Okay, so we're here tonight to appeal the tax abatement for 1/20/25 property valuation at 22 Zakelo Island Road by the town of Harrison. We've been through this process a year ago, and through that process, we learned a lot of things, but one of the things we thought was most important is that we have some sort of documentation in the form of a certified appraisal to state the actual value of our property.
Let me interrupt you just quickly. Your abatement request is for $153,000?
That's correct.
Okay, go right ahead.
Okay.
Skip that.
Okay. Okay, so what we decided to do is to get a certified appraisal for backup documentation to support the property value of our property. Okay. We hired a certified appraiser with over 30 years of experience in the state of Maine. Okay. We discussed with him that we had attempted the abatement process last year without an appraisal, and we believe that that was the primary reason that the town and the board denied our abatement. We felt if we had that appraisal, we would have been in a much better position. We also explained to him that based on our previous experience in this process, that the town would not accept property comparisons outside of Harrison, is our understanding. Okay. We also told him that the town claims to have given us a 25% reduction in our property value for being on an island, and a 5% reduction for having shallow water. Okay. He then explained to us his process, what his process was in determining our appraised value, okay, which would include looking at other comparable island properties that would be outside of Harrison. He made it clear that we would need to do that. He said it would be necessary due to the uniqueness of the property, and since the only other island properties in Harrison are on our island, okay, that he would have to look outside the town as well as within the town.
Which is only six other properties.
There's only 6 other properties on the island. So it would really limit the amount of properties he's looking at, if he's only looking at those 6 properties. He then asked us how the town derived our 25% reduction, and what was the reduction from. We told him that we asked that question to Parker Appraisal at the appeal, the previous appeal, and they could not explain how the 25% was determined. Okay? And that we're still not clear what that 25% was deducted from. We haven't been given any documentation really to show us what they're deducting this 25%.
And why it's and why it was randomly 25%.
In the past, we were told it was 25% because it seemed fair. Okay, that's what we were told. Okay. He said he would not be using percentages. Okay. Additionally, he wanted to be clear with us that we understood that he could not guarantee that his appraisal was going to benefit us. We told him we wanted to do it because we wanted to find out what our property value was worth. Okay. As part of his appraisal process, he externally viewed all island properties and inspected the shoreline of our property and all other properties by both boat and by foot.
On our island.
On our island, right. He stated that there was another property on the island that was virtually the same property as ours, okay, both in home and in shoreline. We showed him the property card for that property, and he was surprised at the discrepancy between the 2 property valuations, a variance of $180,500. He thought that a phone call to Parker Appraisal to discuss this would resolve the matter. Okay. He told us that he did try to call Parker Appraisal 4 times over several weeks and received no response. Okay. After not receiving a response, he wanted to complete his report, so he told us that he was gonna go ahead and include his observation between the two properties in his report, because he felt strongly that the inequity between the two properties should be noted, even though he had never included something like that in one of his reports in the past. Okay? And he included that on page 5 of the appraisal. Okay? So we have provided the board and the town with a copy of the certified appraisal that supports the value of our property as of 4/1 of 2025, okay, the date that we were assessed our property value, to be $812,000. Okay? The town has valued our property at $965,000 as of 4/1 of 2025. The difference being $153,000, which is what we are asking for an abatement on via this appeal. That's pretty much our position.
Last time we discussed percentages more, because that's what the town was using for why they were already giving us a discount. We discussed how it was due to accessing the property. It's not accessible all year round. Even if you can access it in the winter, there's no water. The water table is 0. So it's really not usable in the winter. And that we thought all that should have been taken into account. They randomly assigned us a 25% reduction from what we don't know, but they said it's 25% from something to account for that. But we decided to go ahead and actually just have someone value it as if, what the market value would be for that property based on all that same information without using percentages and get a real value. And so that's what we got from this person, from the assessor that we hired.
If you'd like me to read the section that he has in here, I can. It's up to you. I mean,
Go ahead, anything you'd like.
Okay, so he has here tax assessment.
And it's not a property that was sold or for sale. He was surprised by the fact that when the town did their townwide assessment in 2024, why our property was assessed so much higher than this other property that was only one lot over from ours. Same view, same water frontage, everything the same, and he looked at our property card and theirs, and he couldn't understand the difference. So that's why, even though it's not a sale or anything, he wanted to point that out, that he thought that original town assessment was inequitable between the two properties. So what did he write? You can just read that.
Okay, so it says tax assessment. The appraiser conducted an inspection of the shoreline for all properties on the island by both boat and foot. The subject property's water frontage is shallow with significant aquatic vegetation limiting its suitability for swimming. The property located at map 22 lot 106-3, which is 2 lots over from us, located 2 lots away from the subject, also lacks a swimmable shoreline due to similar vegetation, rendering it undesirable for recreational swimming. This property is 1.3 acres with 250 feet of waterfront and carries an assessed land value of $592,000. Okay. In contrast, the subject's property is assessed its land value at $746,000. It has 1.5 acres and 300 plus feet of waterfront. However, approximately 100 feet of the subject shoreline is non-functional due to dense vegetation. Based on this comparison, the appraiser concludes that the subject's property's current assessment appears excessive and not equitable in relation to nearby properties with similar waterfront limitations. So he basically said that was the same property as ours. It's a 3-bedroom log cabin with about 1,100 square feet. We bought it from the same manufacturer, both on the back side of the island, and he couldn't understand. And to be honest, the first time we came in, we couldn't understand that either. But we didn't understand the process. We didn't do a very good job, I guess, trying to make our point, and we didn't present things properly, I guess. But hopefully, through his report, now that the certified appraiser has looked at it, hopefully that will help our position.
All right,
Yes.
thank you. questions from the board before we go over to the?
I have one, oh, go ahead. Do you mind saying what you paid? So an appraisal is not required in these hearings, so if someone told you an appraisal was needed, it's not required. So comparable sales are.
No, I would say nobody told us we
Okay, good.
needed it, it was just,
Yep.
instead of just making our own argument, having something supplemental that somebody else looked at it objectively.
What was your cost for doing that?
It was $1,800.
Thank you.
And he explained to us that it might not benefit us, so there's no guarantees when they do it, and that it would still cost us $1,800 to find it out. But before even deciding whether we wanted to continue with the process, we really just needed to, we knew what our opinion was, but we needed to know in reality, you know, what we should expect or whatever. So that's why we thought, for $1,800, let's find out one way or the other. You know, we either move ahead or we won't.
Yeah, we kept going back and forth and trying to determine how we could provide evidence to support that we felt our property was valued too high. And it was very difficult for us to do because we don't understand appraisals and how to determine the value of property. So, you know, we got to a point where we just said, we're just gonna bring someone in and have them do it for us. You know, we didn't wanna pay that money, you know, but we had no choice. We felt like we kinda had to, because every time we got questions, you know, how much is the difference between 200 feet of waterfront? You know, I don't know what the value of that represents, you know, so.
Other questions?
So, remind me again, that this property's on an island,
That's correct.
and there's no bridge access, no year-round access. I just remember this from but it helps me remember, and that, and the way you get to the property, in the summer, you have a parking space on the mainland?
So the island has a set of docks that we use on the mainland. We built docks, we share those docks. We have a 14-foot aluminum boat, we drive it over to the island.
And then does that dock come out in the winter?
Yes, it does. It comes out usually
No later than Columbus Day
Columbus Day weekend.
so
It's
it
generally
was-
the weekend that we come and take it apart.
Goes back in typically?
Hasn't been back in yet. We're hoping to get it in probably early May.
It depends on the water levels of the lake after the winter, when the water comes in.
And so when people come and go, you got a bunkhouse, so you may have some visitors but they come and go by boat, obviously.
Correct.
Groceries, everything.
Everything,
Everything by boat.
no matter the weather, yeah, exactly.
And we have shallow water, so we actually pull in our docks earlier because we can't get the docks in if we wait too late. You
For
know, so-
example, this past year, for everybody, every lake, I'm sure, the water levels were very low. Well, our water level where our property is so low that we had planned to take our docks out the weekend after Labor Day, but Labor Day weekend, we happened to have our grown son with us, and literally from one weekend prior to Labor Day weekend, the water level dropped so low that we could, and our docks, they go out pretty far because the water's low. And the first probably at least 100 feet or more of where our docks were actually sitting on the ground. So we had no choice. Labor Day weekend, we were rushing to get the docks out, and the next weekend, there was no water where our docks were. So we were done Labor Day weekend. We rode over and walked in the mud to get to our place the next week, so we could at least get everything out of the house that we needed to get out, because we hadn't planned to do it that soon. It's just, we're at the mercy of the lake, basically. And same thing when the water comes in the spring, you know, it depends when the ice goes out on the lake, and then when it gets deep enough for us to be able to put the floating docks in.
And the last question I had is I understand about the access, so it may be, but is it insulated? There was some comment about.
It's a log home. It's a log home, so.
Yeah,
So
we purchased a log
if
kit.
you choose to go in the winter, walk or whatever, you could.
We would have to cross the lake. Right,
Right,
we'd have to cross the
And
lake
bring all our own water.
and bring all our food and everything with us.
Can't use the bathrooms and there's no
Shut the water
water.
off and the well off
Yeah.
in the winter.
Well,
Close it.
yeah, so
Yeah.
the pipes don't freeze,
Yeah.
right?
And the wells, there was no water in the well I'm sure this past winter, there definitely was no water in the well, but
So so in effect, leaving aside how you access it, it's in some ways mostly seasonal.
Correct.
Yeah, essentially, we believe we can only get to the house 6 months of the year. We use it, we don't even use it 6 months, but some of the people on the island can use it 6 months.
Yeah.
We generally use it 5.
But other people will stay a little long. People on the backside, their water is much deeper. They can use their side much longer.
Yeah, well, I call it the front side, but if you're on the front
Front
side of the
side.
island, they have deeper water. You have
Faces
deeper
in the
water,
main
you
part
can
of the
drive your
lake.
boat and you can get in it,
Right.
you know, throughout October.
Right.
You know,
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay. Anything else? I just done? The assessor?
All right,
Your first name again, I'm sorry.
Jessica Westhaver.
Jessica,
I'm from Parker Appraisal.
Thank you.
We're contracted from the town. So I just want to remind everybody to, when you have an assessment and you have an appraisal, they're using 2 different methods, so they're never going to be exactly the same. I don't understand where it would be appropriate for somebody to tell us, an appraiser to tell us that our method versus their method is right or wrong. Their specialties are in their field to assess a property for sale for market value. Our process is to make sure that we're assessing the property, for just value, make sure we're treating it equitably and fairly amongst other properties in the town. So what I want to start sharing with first is some of the information, again, for the property itself that we have provided. Last year we came and we discussed the deductions in the land assessment, the 25 for the access and the 5% for the properties that have shallower water, We did go back with the feedback that we received last year to reevaluate the percentages that we used. And based on the data, we changed the percentages. We looked to see what values they would give us, and we felt after doing that, we were still comfortable with the values that we've placed. There are a couple of properties, again, we went back and talked about these last year. 7 Zakelo Island Rd, again, back in 2021, sold for $1.25 million. This 5 Zakelo Island Rd has been placed on the market for 2.4. We don't have that, I think we have 1.4 something on it, but it hasn't sold, but it's been placed on the market. However, back in October of this year, I put September, it actually sold in October. Tax map 21, lot 106-1, which is also a log cabin style home, sold for $905,000. So we do have sales on the island. Right now, our assessment is 5% over what they purchased it for. However, we do know based on that sales data that that property was actually sold for over asking price. So we don't know if they'd asked higher, what would have happened, but we just know that it did sell over asking price. So that, when we looked at that factor, we knew we were within 5% of that property. Some of the information within the appraisal report that we just wanted to make sure we brought to light is, right now, we're here defending our value, and the appraiser is not here defending their report. So I can't ask the appraiser questions to find out where they got their information. I don't know who they called, but they didn't call me. They may have called somebody else, but they didn't call me.
They called Bob,
Okay.
the owner.
In the appraisal report, it does very specifically state that this is for a mortgage finance, and that it's for lender-client access only. So we have to make sure that when we're looking at that, we understand what the purpose of the appraisal is for. Again, we can't take sales in other towns. We can't compare your property to properties on Fry Island. We're not allowed to do that. And based on the sales information that we've seen, going back and computing the values, looking at what the properties, have sold for, we still feel that our property, our assessment is fair and equitable. We worry that if we change any of the values now, if we were to lower that accessibility, you're gonna lower the rest of the island, because we have to treat everybody fairly and equitably. And we're gonna bring those properties so under what they've sold for that it's no longer gonna be equitable for them, they're gonna be undervalued. So we feel like where we're at right now is the perfect median for the properties, giving each property its individual adjustment based on the characteristics of those properties.
So, my question is, to zero in on the one property he mentioned that was right nearby, similar type of property, and the assessment is significantly different.
Which property was it?
Okay,
I want to get more from him to answer.
you want me to give it to you?
Okay?
Okay, so this right here is the property we're talking about, 592. And this right here, the 746 is my property.
Right.
Okay, and here on the map, it's where 106.3 and 106.7. And this is
Okay.
a breakout of the land. It kind of shows you, this is all their information they provided at the last. Here's the 592 compared to all the other properties on land, on the shore frontage. Land assessments versus shore frontage, and you can see his is the lowest. And then he's up here, 592. And then here's the property cards for our property and for that other property, okay?
Okay,
So it's right here, 592 and 746, and it's this property here, and this property is 3 and 7. Okay, and then on here you can see.
This is from
Five-
last year.
Yeah, this is all from, this is their information.
Oh,
And the 592 is here, and our 746 is here and here, and then those are the property cards.
Talk about that kind of stuff, right?
Yeah, 103 and 105.
Yeah.
103, 105, and 107, yeah, and then here's the specifics on this, and the specifics is 746. Here's ours right here. 320 feet, 746. This is the
Last meeting was
592.
the last time you guys went.
Yep,
Yep.
this was part of what we used last time. They're there at 592, and I was up here, and there's 2 here, and then these are the property cards for both us and them.
Right.
Do you want a copy as well?
I just want to verify which property we're talking about, so I know.
We're talking about this property here and this property.
103, okay.
Isn't that the one, I swear we had an abatement request on that one
We
where
did.
it was specific because of the shoreline, the angle of it?
Yeah, it's the only property on the island that has a cove, so it's got that corner kind of parcel. So it's the assessment of the waterfront is my word has lost me. It's because of the curve and the way the view is, it's a linear measurement, which is standard in assessment for properties. When you have a waterfront property that kind of goes jig-jag and everything, is you do a linear based on the characteristics of the property. And that was we spoke about that one last year. That one specifically has that reduction in foot frontage, not reduction, but it's measured in a different way because of the shape and the topography of the property. That one property has a lower assessment just because the frontage is a little bit low, it's smaller.
So we specifically addressed that with the certified appraiser. And he said the 2 properties are the same, and that code would have no impact on that value. I mean, the certified appraiser told us that. And we kind of said that last time, but we had a certified appraiser come out and look at that property and let us know. But we took them out by vote and showed them. Okay? By the way, the 106.5 is the property that is for sale for $2.4 million. A good portion of his property is in that cove too, and he's at 2.4 million. Okay, so, if we're gonna say that that property is.
You're sharing half of that
Half of that cove is his, you can see, okay?
on the map.
So that's something we addressed with the certified appraiser. And he said that there shouldn't be any difference in the value. There'd be minimal differences, he said. It's practically the same property.
He also, we talked to him about the 7 Zakelo Island Road, which is the one they fall on every time, that $1.2 million sale that happened. And, it's almost like we're gonna be punished forever, because we're gonna be limited to only these 6 properties, whether they sell or don't sell, and that's it. If we can't use other properties, it's such a unique property, there's not enough comparison. That's almost the disadvantage itself. If we can only use our neighbors' properties and only when and if they sell. So, you know, that it just seems like that's a disadvantage. We tried to explain that to him, that you were only gonna accept that. He said that, you know, that's not enough comparisons. 7 Zakelo Island Road, he didn't even consider it a comparison. It's on the other side of the lake. The water frontage is completely different. The view is wide open to the main part of the lake. Ours is not. It's a cove.
And it's 3 times the square footage.
And not only that,
Wow.
but the total outbuilding assessment on that property, it's got so many unique features to that property. It's got a sauna. It has another outbuilding with an office. Our outbuilding assessment is $26,000. That property you keep comparing to has an outbuilding assessment, just the outbuilding assessment, $191,000. That is not equitable property to our property. We're just looking at numbers here, but if you actually, you know, they have the disadvantage of not seeing what that property looks like. So we're just comparing this house, that house. Again, it's the other side of the island, it's deeper water. They have an outbuilding assessment of $191,000. It's not equitable to any other property on the island. That's the reason that sold. And the house next door to us has been off and on the market. It's only on the market in the summer, and then it comes off the market for $2.4 million. He's only had 3 people look at it. So it's not realistic. We all know it's not realistic. Or everybody on the island would be panicking that he was gonna actually sell it for that much, and he's not. Now, the house that just sold.
By
You're
the
saying
way-
it sold,
by the way,
wait a second.
He bought the land
Am
for,
I done? Am
Oh,
I
I'm sorry.
done?
No, you're still on.
I'm sorry, you asked a question, so I thought we were asking questions. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Stand by.
Go ahead.
Continue, I'm sorry.
So I think the thing that we're getting hung up on is that we're using them as comparables. We're trying to show sales data, and we're trying to show, because I think where everybody is really concerned is the land value. And by law, we're supposed to assess a property by its overall value. We have to break it down between land and value just because we have to break it down somehow, but we look at overall property value. If you look at the assessments of the sales properties comparative to yours, they are all substantially higher assessed for their extra buildings and their extra. We're not competing, and we're not, you know, looking to defend that their structures are more valuable or less valuable than yours. We're trying to look at the assessment process and how we've assessed your land. Your land has overall been assessed by being located on a specific body of water. And that body of water, all properties in the town of Harrison are assessed with that body of water as the base value. And then we adjust your property on the island for the factors that lower the value for access, water frontage. So we're using the same methodology, and then I'm adjusting them for your characteristics. The sales data gives us an idea, the land on the mainland versus what's selling on an island, what the difference is, if that land property on an island is that much less valuable than what's being sold on the mainland. That helps us determine whether or not we need to do a bigger or smaller land adjustment to the factor. So if we're seeing properties that look exactly like yours on the mainland that are selling for the same amount that we're seeing sales, and again, we don't have a lot of sales, we have to look at the land value. So we know that the buildings are being assessed the same way as all of the other buildings in the town. We then have to adjust the land based on the data that we have. And we've set a land value for all of the sales and have adjusted them accordingly. And like I said, we've gone back and we've tried to adjust the values of the land with that percentage, and it just doesn't work. It brings them so low that it does not work. It creates inequities for all of the other properties on the island. So we have to find a middle ground in making sure that those values for the land are treating everybody fairly, whether it's high or low. Sometimes that happens. And we're never gonna be exact market because assessing is not an exact science. What we need to make sure we're doing is treating everybody fairly and equitably. And like I said, with the research that we've done and adjusting the values, we've spent a lot of time trying to figure out what would be a better assessment, and this is the numbers we believe are appropriate.
Can I ask a question?
Question?
The Cove area, how long has that cove been there?
I have no idea.
How long do you think it's been there?
No, Paul, just ask what you're gonna ask.
I mean, the cove's been there forever.
You've assessed the property 3 other times. This is the first time you ever called it.
Our property has always been the same as that property, for years, for 30-some odd years, 33, 35 years. All of a sudden, this cove thing came about. And it didn't come about until we came here to Cumberland County to actually appeal last time we came. Prior to that, it wasn't an issue. The town didn't even bring it up when we went to see the town the first time. It wasn't until we presented our position, we actually supplied all our information to the town early so you guys could prepare. And we got ours like 3 days before. And all of a sudden, this cove thing came up. And in the past, all the properties were very similar on the island. And that was what the big concern was the last time, was all of a sudden there was this one big drop in one of the properties, which we said wasn't fair. It wasn't fair. That one property had a significant drop. It wasn't equitable. It wasn't fair.
This is the first time that that property's been assessed that much lower than our property or anybody else's property.
And that's why we got the certified appraiser to look at it.
Right.
Because we felt that they were just saying it was a cove, that there was a difference in value and they had to come up with something because we brought it up, because we discovered it. And he said that based on what he saw, that cove isn't going to change the value.
But you brought up about the mainland properties. Okay. Again, our property has the unique feature of not being accessible all day, every day. So, it's hard to compare it to the mainland properties. And then you randomly assign 25%. But he said that it's hard to work with percentages. That's the reason he looked at other properties.
He's not appraising, he's appraising, not assessing. They're two different methods.
I understand.
He cannot use his methodology in the methodology that we use, because they're two very different practices. They're two very different trainings.
Okay.
He can't, that is not a judgment call for him to make. Yes, he can come up with a value based on the criteria that he uses, but he's not using the criteria that we use and the requirements by the Maine Constitution that we have to use.
Okay. The property that just sold as well, that sold above ask. So that property went on the market. Within the same week it went on the market, it got the over ask price. Okay. So I guess we're not really gonna know what the open market is, because the people who bought that property own the property right next door to it that doesn't have a house on it. And they over asked because they wanted that property so they could purchase the whole end of the island.
Are they the same name
I'm sorry, the same name as,
as the two owners?
Yes.
I haven't.
The maiden name.
yep, her maiden, yes, she owns, Paige Herbert owns both that property and the other property. So to use that, it's kind of disingenuous to say that somebody, paid over ask and that that's what it got. We don't know what it would have gotten because it was purchased by another person who already lives on the island and already knows what it takes to come to the island, is already coming to the island and staying in a tent on their property because they don't have a
So they believe the
home.
property's worth that.
They wanted it, so to them, it was worth it, but
Absolutely.
okay. But we don't know what somebody else who hasn't had to do that is gonna be willing to pay. We don't know that it
And
would
a
have
couple-
sold for that much.
couple other
And they
things-
only put it on the market less than that, because they thought, much less than what it was assessed for, because they thought that it wouldn't sell right away. So, yes,
And it
it's
did.
sold. It's to somebody else who lives on the island. So you don't know what somebody else would have been willing to pay for a house they can only access part of the year.
But somebody on the island, it was worth it to them to buy that, so somebody
worth
on
it.
the island thinks it's worth that.
Can I ask a question
them,
related to that?
correct.
Yeah.
So would the butter be considered an arm's length transaction?
It would be, so it depends on the situation. If the
My feel is
situation,
no.
it depends, and there's a lot of situations where that applies. If they were purchasing a piece of property because it was vacant and they wanted to absorb it because they needed to meet requirements of the town, if they needed to buy it to use it as a septic lot, that would be, because it's unused, their property's unusable for whatever, like they can't put a septic or a well on it.
They can't?
But this is a purchase of a standalone property. If
But
they
they're the
were.
abutter, they're the direct abutter. They share a
Yes.
property line, they share a
Yes.
property line.
Yes,
Yeah.
they
They share
do.
it properly. Yes,
Yes,
they
they
do.
do.
So my question would be is, if somebody were if you were to buy the house right next door to you for asking price, that makes it an invalid sale? I don't think so.
What I'm saying is it wouldn't necessarily be an arm's length transaction because of the motivation behind the transaction from the.
But it was on the open market, and
I don't think it was on the open market for very long, maybe
I mean,
a
we don't-
couple
it
of
was on the
days.
open market for 45 days.
Well,
They
the
had
offer
an
came in
offer
low.
much longer than that. Much longer than that.
And it's my understanding that there was an issue with the property too, where they could not build on the other piece
other
because the
piece is a
corner of
rock.
the lot was something that he was trying to work out with the other owner to get the piece of that corner of the lot, and the other owner wasn't gonna give it to him. But then when they sold the property, it's not an issue anymore because their daughter purchased basically the property. And the daughter owns both properties.
The property that they own is, they cannot put a septic and a well there. It's a rock,
The other property, but not the property they purchased.
which is why they purchased it. That's
Right.
what I'm saying, yes.
Okay.
And they had the offer, we know they had the offer. It might have been out 45 days, but they could have been, they didn't get another offer, and they had to take it. If they got that offer over ask within the first week that they put it up, and we know they did, we know them, we're friends with them, that they waited 45 days, then maybe they didn't get another offer, or they certainly didn't get one above that, or they would have taken it.
That sale was after, anyway, that sale was after 4/1/25, as far as I'm concerned. That's 7 months after when that happened. So that sale didn't take place when we submitted our abatement and when we had the certified appraiser come out to do our certified
Because
appraisal.
he would have had to take it
He
into
would have taken that into account,
That
but
had
that didn't happen until October 24th. That didn't close till October 24th. So as far as we're concerned, that sale should not be taken into account because it had not taken place as of 4/1/25, which is when the assessment, the value of our property is determining our assessment. And we don't believe you can take a property as for sale and use that in determining anything, just because the property's for sale for $2.5 million, doesn't mean he's gonna sell it for 2.
If there was a house for sale for $300,000 on the island, you wouldn't be looking at that and saying, well,
I haven't seen it.
Of course, there isn't one, but
Right.
I'm saying, if there was a listing for that.
I would share that information,
not saying
absolutely,
you
and
wouldn't
that would
share
give
it,
us,
but
that would
you
give
wouldn't
us
feel
pause
that-
to look at the properties.
In addition, that home that sold, it has 220 feet more waterfront than my property, and it has deep water. So it only sold for $905. We're asking $812. The difference is only $93,000.
And that's sold for how much, did you say?
It sold for $905 on October 24th, 2025. Our value is $812 that we're stating our value is $93,000. We're stating that if you look at 220 feet of waterfront, what's the value of that? I mean, I don't know, I need to appraise it, and then if you look at the fact that that property has deep water and is swimmable, and our property does not have deep water, it's not swimmable. The town believes that the shallow water is worth at least 5%. We believe it's more than that, but they've already agreed that we should get a reduction on the water, shallow water by 5%. We don't believe the percentages should be used at all. I mean, we don't understand how you can use percentages. Because they can't explain, they have no reasoning for why they're using the 25%.
But they're consistent. That's, and what we have to find is the inconsistent, okay? And that's what we're trying to drill down and find, okay? Question?
I would just say that inconsistencies, I think, would apply more to an unjust discrimination appeal versus an overvaluation appeal. And I would consider this an overvaluation appeal because we have an
That's what
appraisal.
it's selected.
So, right.
So is everybody done saying their piece?
So So anybody from the public that wanted to say anything regarding this particular issue,
Can I just say a couple other things?
okay? But then we.
Okay, one is that the 7 Zakelo Island they keep bringing up, that's over 4 years old, 5 years old now. So I think that should be taken into account. And the other thing is that what the town did was town-wide. What we did, we had an individual plan, just specifically look at our property. So I'm gonna.
I hear you, I understand. So we're gonna close the public participation section. I'm gonna go now just to the board, and of course, we can ask any questions, whatever you want, but we need to see what questions we have and what we feel needs to be done here. Who wants to go first?
Well, I mean,
David?
I don't have, I mean, if we're really to discuss?
Yeah.
And does anybody have more questions for the people, or are we ready to deliberate? So I start with the assessment presumed valid, so that the assessor or the assessor's agent doesn't have to prove anything, they have to prove they're right. It's the applicant, taxpayer's burden to prove that the assessment is wrong.
Right.
So, regardless of whether the factoring's right, and whether the adjustment's 4.5, and all that, you don't have to prove you're right, it's just, and so we just start from that, I think that's just kind of fundamental, that the taxpayer always has this burden, and so, and I want to hear what everybody else has to say. I mean, my view of this is that, mass appraisal technique for assessing, you get the benefit of a 10% leeway. The Maine Supreme Court has said if the assessment's within, assuming you're 100%, but if you're at 100% of value and the assessment's within 10% of market value, you're good enough, because, it's not property by property specific appraisal. You're trying to create uniformity, equality, and if it's within 10%, typically that's not enough of a difference for the taxpayer to show that the assessment was wrong. Here, the difference between the appraisal and the assessment is greater than 10%, it's higher than that. And so the question for me is, has the taxpayer through the appraisal given us credible evidence to show that the assessment was wrong? Not that the assessment methodology was flawed or anything, we're just talking about market value of a specific piece of property and saying, as of April 1, 2025, what was this property worth? What was the market value? What was the just value? And I, look at the appraisal and the criticisms of it. I don't see anything in Maine law that says you have to, in your appraisal, for tax abatement purposes, you have to be confined to the jurisdiction of the locality. I mean, there are state board decisions that say, it's the appraiser's discretion to find the most comparable sales. He looked at Fry Island. I think it's appropriate to look at Fry Island for comparable sales, make adjustments from there, because it's somewhat analogous to this situation. So I don't leave, if those are in Standish, whatever, I don't think that's makes it a flawed appraisal. And he did say there's some different verbiage there, because he's got some form attached, but he does say the intended use is to tell them what the value of their property is. It's April 1, and we all know April 1 is the key date, not April 2, it's not March 3rd, it's April 1 of the assessment year. So I think it's pretty clear to me, although it could be better stated, that the intent of the appraisal was to tell the property owner what the value was as of April 1 for tax purposes, abatement purposes. And, so leaving aside, the appraiser used sales from outside the town, which I don't think debunks it. I think to me, I read it, I looked at the adjustments that were made, looking at Fry Island, I think it's credible, I'm waiting to, I want to hear what other people think about it, but I think it's credible evidence of what the value was as of April 1. It's more than 10%. And again, it's not a question of whether the assessment is right or wrong. It's presumed valid. We don't have to say it was flawed. We don't have to say it was wrong or anything. It's presumed valid. It's just, does the taxpayer come in and provide credible evidence of what the value was for a very difficult area to assess? Obviously, it's an island. It's not year-round access. All the things we talked about before. But, I want to hear what you all have to think about it. I'm not an appraiser, I'm not an assessor, but I read it, it didn't seem credible to me. And if it's credible, I think that the taxpayer's given us credible evidence to show that the property was overvalued as of April 1. That's my thought.
Thank you.
I agree.
I agree.
You got to say more than that.
Again, it's, this isn't a subdivision in Scarborough of 4-bedroom colonials. This is a unique island, and the properties that were included in the appraisal report were like-kind properties. So they weren't necessarily in the same town, but because of the unique situation of, I'll call it a neighborhood, because just to use the term of what it is, the unique characteristics of that neighborhood required the appraiser to go outside of the community to establish market value. And since we're looking at an overvaluation appeal, market value is what determines. And yes, the appraiser can be within 10%. That's 10% either way, so it's really 20%. They have a wide range that they can be and be statutorily fine with their appraisal at 100% valuation. But I think the appraiser.
You mean the assessment?
The assessment, yeah. So I think the appraiser was clear that, and did a good job finding like-kind properties, which, given the unique characteristics of this particular property, obviously would need to go outside the town itself. So I agree with the appraised value.
Of the assessed value? Or
No, the appraiser.
Okay, thank you.
I do actually have one question for you. When you had indicated last year, we had asked for you to go back to the table and just re-look at those percentages. Was it 25% or what?
It was the overall, because the initial conversation was to maybe create a neighborhood for the island. And we didn't feel like we had enough information to create a neighborhood for the island, because it would have been based off high sales, and old land sales that happened prior to 2020.
Right.
So we didn't have enough information to create a neighborhood specifically for Zakelo Island. So what we then went back and did was we looked at 25% for access, we looked at 5% for the property, frontage, the type of frontage, and adjust things accordingly to see how we could fairly attribute them. And it didn't work. It just didn't make, we couldn't find a happy medium to place the whole island in a way that it would be fair and equitable to all properties.
Is the 25% specific to Zakelo Island?
Yes.
Yeah. I feel like you might be starting to build enough evidence to support a further adjustment, because I can understand why you use a 25%, but I look at the situation, I think having these comparables that were provided, you are limited in where you can look. There's not too many island communities in the area, but I'm following in the same conclusion. And I was intrigued to hear about the $905,000 is maybe not an arm's length transaction or our motivations, but it did hit the open market. And I don't know where I saw the pictures of it, but compared to the interior pictures here of this, your home, I felt this is a true, more of a camp to me in a way, versus the other had more updated appliances and things like that. I don't know if that came from pictures that you had provided or where.
The other property is older, but I don't know as far as the internal updates. I haven't seen pictures of inside their home. I don't.
They were in, maybe it's the
They're all in the
Provided
appraisal,
to you.
yeah.
the
The
appraisal.
appraiser took them.
I'm sorry.
So so in just looking at it, I felt the 905 that was given on the other one that actually sold, if that is, I know it's sold later, but it's being provided as an evidence. I just felt that was a higher valued home, which leads me to back into this 812 and find it reasonable with the Fry Island properties as well. So, long story short, I'm in agreement with all this.
Okay, thank you. I look at the difference between the subject property and the number 4 Zakelo Island, okay? Those values of land, difference between $592,000 and $746,000, okay? To me, I just think there's way too much difference there, okay? which heads me back towards the appraiser, okay? On general value, okay, out there. I just, I don't see why it's that big of a different spread there, okay? That's my kind of problem, okay, with the assessed value. I think it should be reduced. And I think, and I don't know how else, other than to come up with that number, than with using that appraisal, okay, as a good guide to do that, okay? And I would just suggest to look at the differences maybe in the future a little bit more, okay? Because, you know, I've been in the real estate business for over 40 years in sales, and they would, you know, there's some differences and a lot of similarities too, okay? And I know I would look at some differences here. So that's kind of where I'm coming from. So I'm leaning towards, you know, granting the request for the abatement, for the amount that was requested.
May I ask one question? I don't know if that's appropriate or not.
Go ahead.
My only question is, and because I don't have the appraiser here to ask these questions,
Right.
and I'm not an appraiser, did the appraiser visit these other properties on Fry Island? Do they know what the differences are? So that's my only other concern is I don't know the differences on those, and I can't ask that question. So that's information that I don't have, that, you know, I can
Fair question.
compare.
Right, oh, yeah, sure, I understand. Yeah, you can't ask somebody something that's not here.
Right, so I just,
And we're just going with what we have for information here and all. So that's,
I'm wondering if a return phone call from the company, the appraisal company owner would have clarified that somewhat.
is it
This isn't the first time.
common practice that an appraiser is gonna call a town assessor? I've never heard of that happening.
We have testimony that they did.
I know, I'm just saying, I don't know because I have not heard from my boss that he's received a call, so I just didn't know. That's never happened for me in the many years that I've been doing this.
He
so I
actually
don't-
said the first thing he was going to do, because of the land discrepancy cost, was to call and just ask how that came about before he did anything else, just because it was so obvious to him, and he couldn't understand it, and so he was just calling to ask questions. He wasn't gonna, he just said I'm gonna give him a call and just see what they have to say. Maybe he said, maybe I'm missing something, I don't know.
Right.
So he told us, and through the entire time, the 4 or 5 weeks it took him to do it, he said that he was continuously calling, and finally he said, I just want to get the report out to you. So that's why he actually put that in there, because he wasn't able to get a response. He just wanted to
I
know.
wish they had been here, so yeah.
And you know what, maybe we should apologize for that, but it was an additional cost to us to have him to come, and at some point, now we're losing the benefit of an abatement if we're putting out money out front, and then we lose, so that, I'm
Okay.
sorry he couldn't come.
yeah, we're good. Any other question? Yeah, I don't have one question. You have one last question on anything? I want to give you a fair chance to,
No
Say anything.
question.
okay.
Can I just say one more thing for
Yes.
the record,
Oh,
so it's on record?
Yes.
Is that, and for anyone listening, if anyone's watching, we do not require an appraisal. So if anyone is looking and watching and thinking that they're gonna be out $1,800 or have to spend hundreds of dollars to come before us to fight for their right to have the assessment reviewed, that is not required. So we just need evidence to present to the board. It could be a realtor giving you comparable sales, as long as you can defend it and we agree with you. So the appraisal is a non-requirement. So I don't want anyone watching or thinking or being disheartened thinking they would have to spend $1,800 on an appraisal to come before us. That is absolutely not the case.
And
But
just to kind of build on what you're saying, for positive, is that all the way the law reads, it says the taxpayer must provide credible affirmative evidence. It doesn't say appraisal, it doesn't say anything like that. So just to kind of reiterate what you said, is it does say that, so.
Okay, yeah, we didn't know any other way, and so that's what we did.
Oh, sure, I mean, you don't know.
I think what makes it, I agree with that, what makes it, at least for me, a little more difficult here is that you're not in a well-established neighborhood where you've got similar properties that have sold and you can give us the information and say this is this and this. This is, when we heard this before, the difficulty was I mean, again, the assessor doesn't have to prove anything. They're trying to make a good faith adjustment to the fact that this is an island that doesn't have year-round access and all that. And so they come up with what they think is an appropriate adjustment. And, you know, all things equal, you know, kind of, at least for me on this appeal, the appraisal gets me over the hump of someone who has, you know, looked at the, you know, he talked about Fry Island just briefly in the report, saying that's where you should go look because of the similarities. It's accessed by a ferry, but it's similarities in that regard, and that helped me. That and you know, kind of working just within the island and comparing one to another. For me, it doesn't necessarily get me to market value. It just gets me to equality among apples, but it doesn't tell me at the end of the day what something is worth as of April 1. It just tells me vis-a-vis someone else, I should be higher or lower, at least. But anyways, but I agree. You don't have you. It's helpful though for me in this matter.
Okay, could I have a motion from anybody on the board on what exactly you'd like to do next?
You want to do it?
Sure. I'd like to move that the applicant has proven overvaluation appeal with a abatement requested reduction of $153,000 for a new assessed value of $812,000 from a prior value of $965,000.
Do I have a second?
I'll second.
I'll second that.
Okay. Let me just make sure that we, again, know what we're voting on. Okay, one more time. So we're voting to grant the abatement appeal here from the $153,000 as requested with a total value of $812.
Correct.
And if that sounds good to everyone on the board, that's what the motion is, all in favor of that motion? Looks like it's unanimous, and that will be our decision for today.
And just
Any other
we
comments?
should just vote just to make these days. So the premise of all that is we're finding the appraisal to be a credible evidence of value. I'm correct? So I just make a motion, you know, just for the basis of the motion is that the taxpayer presented credible evidence of value. We find it to be credible to overcome the presumption of validity, and therefore that's the factual basis on which we grant the abatement.
Credible evidence,
Credible evidence, yeah.
and
So we should just
stop
all
at that,
agree.
right, yeah.
We should probably all agree that the appraisal constituted credible evidence of value on which to base granting the abatement. If we agree.
I agree.
I was trying to keep the appraisal out of it, is what I was trying to keep out. I agree with the credible evidence that they provided, basically of the
Okay,
sales
put
that
this way.
happened to be.
We just say that the taxpayer presented credible evidence of value.
That's what I would go with that.
Okay.
That sound good to you?
Sounds great.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Done.
Okay.
How will this be handled in future years, so I'm not back here again?
Well, that's a hopeful good question.
Because I think our next one, I have that
I
exact.
mean, it's pretty important because, you know,
Okay, we'll stay for the next one.
yeah, we'll stay for the next one, but, you know, there has to be an adjustment made so that in future years,
We can't tell the town what to do,
yeah,
okay? So,
okay.
yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Okay, next, does anybody need a quick minute or two break, or everybody okay?
Lower the waters.
Right next to him. Come right down, please. So our next abatement, request is for 475 Cape Mundy Road, and, in Harrison, map and lot 13, /55 by Lawrence and Is it Arlene, Mankovich? Arlene? Mankovich?
Right.
Okay. So, you folks are the applicants?
We were here last year.
Take it away, you look familiar.
Okay.
We did it last year, we're here again. We were approved last year, but we're still here again.
Yes, I understand.
All right, so, again, this year, we filed for a property tax assessment abatement with the town of Harrison. But different from last year, we had one reason why we thought our valuation was discriminatory, unfair, and inequitable. And this year, there are two reasons that we think it has these problems. Now, first of all, with this question of discrimination, when the town of Harrison sent their letter about this, even though last year and this year we said the source of this discrimination is that some people in the town are paying taxes based upon the market value of their property. And some people, including us, are paying taxes based upon something that's above market value because they've multiplied market value by a non-market factor of 1.25. So the discrimination is not that they haven't consistently applied the rules to properties that have 2 dwelling units, quarters, garages, or separate cottages. So there's a valuation method that the town of Harrison uses that involves the multiplication of 3 factors. One is the market-based estimate of the current value of 1 acre of similar improved land. They multiply that by the fraction of an acre of the property being assessed. So in our case, it's 0.48 acres. And then 3, they apply a 1.25 factor if the property has 2 dwellings, units, quarters, garages, or separate cottages. Now, the 1.25 factor is a discriminatory because it's not market-based. Now, we observe credible evidence from the market of improved land that the value reflects the costs of the improvements that have been made. Now, for example, the town sent 2 comparable properties they thought were comparable. Comp number 2 is at 539 Cape Monday Road, down the road from us. It's also shorefront, and the valuation sheet says it's got a dug well. Now, if you spend $20,000 to improve the land by putting in a drilled well, all right, we would expect from the real estate marketplace that there's evidence that would increase the value of the improved land. How much? Well, we expect that there's a link between the cost of making the improvement and then the value of the improved land, right? So let's say it's a good investment, you can get your money back. We'd expect the value of that land to probably go up to $20,000, the cost that it took to drill the well, right? So if you had 2 properties that are exactly identical, one's got a drilled well, one doesn't, if you're a buyer, you're not gonna spend more than the cost to drill the well to buy the one that doesn't have the drilled well. So there's a link that we observe in the real estate market, all right? Now, in this case, that would have led to a 2.5% increase in the value of that improved land, that comp 2. Now, if we were talking about a similar shorefront property that was twice as big, having made the same investment in a $20,000 prudent investment to drill a well, that would be half of that percentage. If the land were not on the shorefront and it was valued at half as much, if you drilled that well, it'd be a 5% increase in the value of that land, all right? So the point here, it's clear that applying a similar percent change to increase property values for any given improvement, and applying that to lots of different sizes, big or small, or of different types, shorefront and non-shorefront, is not going to give you an accurate estimate of the link between the costs of improvements and the value of the improved land. And that's what we observe, that's the credible evidence that we see in the real estate market. Now, last year, Robert Gringus was here from Parker Appraisals, and they employed this same thing, and we asked them, is there any data to support this 25% factor? It's interesting to me that this seems arbitrary, and it's similar to the 25% factor we just heard about on the island. So 25% seems to come out of the air. He provided no data to back it up. And in fact, that's not surprising, because if you did have a good statistical sample of properties that have different improvements, where you could quantify the linkage between the cost of the improvements and the value of the land, you're not going to come up with a single percentage factor for all different types of and sizes of land, because it's not going to work. It's going to be inaccurate. All right. So this link between improved cost and land value is really key to our valuation, because we went to the town of Harrison in 2021 to get a permit. And we were told we couldn't get a permit to make the improvement we made, which all we wanted to do was take an existing bay. We have a 4-bay garage. We wanted to take one of the bays, and we wanted to make it into sleeping quarters with a 3/4 bathroom. Only for when we have visitors and we need some extra space, all right? And they said, well, you're not going to get a permit if you add a kitchen, because that's going to make it another dwelling unit. So we got the permit, we didn't add a kitchen. So this is not an ADU, all right? Although the town of Harrison, in sending us the comps, seemed to have made a point in the letter that here's 2 comps, both of which have an accessory dwelling unit. We don't have an accessory dwelling unit. This space where we've got a bed doesn't have a closet, which is why it's called a sleeping quarters and not a bedroom. And there's no refrigerator, there's no stove, there's no microwave, there's nothing that would allow you to live there as a dwelling, all right? So when we did this, we repurposed existing space. We didn't change the size of the foundation, the height of the dwelling. We tied into an existing septic system that we didn't have to expand its capacity. We tied into our existing well, our existing electric service drop. There was no change to the driveway to make additional parking spaces or anything, and we didn't have to change anything on the landscape, all right? So we don't have an ADU where those kinds of improvements might be necessary, and where you would expect then this link between cost of improvements and the lot might be happening there. And so we don't have ADU, we have a property with 1 dwelling comprised of 1 bedroom and 2 sleeping quarters, with one of the sleeping quarters located in the detached garage structure. The observed link between improved land value and the cost of improvements would mean that applying this 25% factor is at odds with what you would see, the credible evidence that we see in the market, that there's a link between the cost of the improvements and the value of the improved land. Now, this inconsistency with the market is obviously, if we think about what if back in 2001, before we made the improvements, we had a fire that burned down both of our structures. All right, and then we said, all right, we're just going to sell the land. All right, we would expect to get if it was accurate, that value of an acre of similar property times our 0.48. We'd get the market value for land, all right? Now, if we made that improvement and a week later, both structures burned down, the site wouldn't look any different from the previous site when we hadn't made it. The idea then that we would be able to sell it at a 25% premium to market because the structure that burned down had repurposed some of its garage storage space into a sleeping quarter is inconsistent with evidence from the real estate market. And similarly, because there's this link between the cost of the land and the value of the property, think about this crazy result that happens because of this methodology. If we spent $50,000 to build a breezeway to connect our home to our garage, all right, we would be making a capital improvement to our property that would result in the assessed value going down. Because we'd expect that link to mean, well, the value of the structure should go up by about $50,000. But because you'd no longer have separate buildings, you would reduce the land value by the $184,594 that the 1.25 does. So we would get this perverse result that is completely at odds with the marketplace, that making a capital improvement to our property of this type would lead to a decrease in the valuation of our entire property. So we've got this overvaluation because we've got a 1.25 factor that's non-market based being applied to our property. The town of Harrison's comp number 2, the 2024 valuation included the 1.25 factor, all right? And it led to a valuation of $1,353,100. The property sold in 2024 for $1,200,000. Applying the 1.25 factor resulted in overvaluation. Had it not been applied, the sale price would not have been below the assessed value. So the comp that they gave us is a case study of an example where applying this factor leads to an overvaluation. Now, the evidence from the real estate market also shows that we're compounding this problem because last year we were here and we looked at the valuation sheet, and if you multiplied the 0.48 percentage of an acre times the value that they put in, the market value of an acre with similar properties, and then multiplied that by the 1.25, you got, that yielded the number they had for our property value. Right? The town of Harrison's current valuation worksheet shows that they've updated the value of an acre of similar property, and they've reduced it to $900,000. And when you multiply our 0.48 times the 900,000 and don't use the 1.5, we have a difference in valuation of $306,206. So all we're asking here, and so if you look at the comps they've provided and look at the shorefront property value per acre, all right, the comps they've provided show that the land values are 22, the land value per acre is 22 and 30% higher than our land value per acre. Right? So we're asking that we want to be assessed at the market value of our property. And for the land, that means we don't apply a non-market factor of 1.25. We use the price that the town of Harrison has got on the valuation sheet for a similar 1 acre of property like ours. And if we do that, our land is valued at $432,000. Town of Harrison's estimate of our structures is $443,000. We do not have an ADU, all right? So that's a valuation of $875,000. The town of Harrison's land value is based upon last year's calculation. It doesn't include their updated land value. So they've got us at $1,365,800. So that's where the abatement of that we're asking for, $490,800 comes from. the 1.25 factor applied to the wrong number accounts for 184,594 of that, which is the abatement you granted us last year on our appeal. We're asking for that again, and because they didn't update the calculation for their own estimate of the market value of our land, that's the 306,206, the sum of that's the $490,800. Okay, excuse me, I get a little bit
That's
worked up
okay.
about this, particularly because I have the same frustration that they have. We went through this last year. The town of Harrison was given your decision. I had listed out the same arguments that this is discriminatory because some people are based on the market and other people like ourselves are not, that this methodology looks to be flawed. A simple ratio is just inaccurate. It's not data-based. And yet, here we are again because they just didn't seem to pay any attention. And their response is completely irrelevant to the issues that we've brought up. I never said they didn't consistently apply the rule. That's not what the discrimination's about. The discrimination is some people are market and we're not. Yeah.
All right. Any
So-
questions?
I wasn't here at the last, if you were here before, I don't think I was, but, so is it your understanding that if you had, instead of converting the one bay in the garage to a bedroom with a 3/4 bath, you had just built in a small addition on your house with one bedroom and a 3/4 bath, you would have been rated 1.0 instead of 1.25?
Yes, and in fact, I would have done that.
No, I mean, you don't have to go any further.
Right, no, but it's just,
So,
yeah.
Okay, that was my question.
But let me
And so
just-
the discrimination that you're articulating is that I should be treated like everybody who, you don't have an ADU, you don't have another dwelling unit, so the class of people who get this 1.25, you're not in that class because
Right.
you don't have it, you should be in the other class, which is I just added a bedroom and a
We didn't even
3/4
add it.
bath, and if I just did that like everybody else does as an addition or whatever, I'd be 1.0.
right, in fact, with the 1.0, I would have preferred, and I think most buyers would have preferred, if you've got a house with a bedroom and 2 sleeping quarters, it'd be preferred if it were all in one structure, but we couldn't because of the zoning.
So is any of this geared to like Airbnbs or, I
No.
mean?
We couldn't rent it, you can't cook. We have a coffee maker.
Okay, and what's the minimum lot size out there?
Minimum what?
Lot size?
I don't know.
I do not know.
Do you know if you're allowed?
On the lake, you mean?
Is it a quarter, half an acre,
It's the
40,000?
0.48 acres.
Ours is, but
Ours is.
I know what your land is.
Yeah.
Do you know what the?
I do not know.
Okay. Okay. And, okay, thank you.
you said you had 2 points.
Other questions
2 points.
before you get started?
I did have a
Yes,
quick question.
yes.
The 184 from last year.
Yeah.
Was that because of the ADU component, 1.25 and reverting back to 1?
Yes,
That
that was
amount
it. Yep.
is for what that's worth.
So that was,
Yeah.
what we did last year was that one. Last year, that calculation, the 0.48 times the value of a full acre times the 1.25, we said the 1.25 is not market-based. That's where that came from. But this year, they didn't even update the calculation. That's the second issue.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
Yeah, I believe last year, is it Bob in your company?
Yes.
Yeah.
Bob Green.
He felt like it's more valuable because we have an extra bedroom, regardless of the fact that our property is on a steep downhill. So the house is down here. I think there's 15 granite steps. If you add coming out of our house, there's 3 steps up to the driveway and 15 granite steps up where the front door of this garage is facing the road, close to the road. So, you know, he kept saying, that's valuable, you can use that. Well, in all sorts of weather, out, down, it's simply overflow. Our kids used to sleep in the garage. And we
Okay.
just made it more pleasant for the 2 weeks out of the year they visit us.
All right, well, let me hold back on any other
Yeah.
comments for a bit, and I want to let the the assessor go ahead
Yeah,
and present their case.
The first thing I just wanna touch base on, and I'm not sure where this is coming from, that we've changed values or adjusted values for this year. My first question is, I don't understand what that is, because we haven't changed any land values.
Well, the stuff that the town of Harrison provided here is the valuation sheet,
Sure.
and it's got the base developed acre assessment, 922,758.
Yeah.
Last year, that was like $1.5 million. If you look at last year's assessment sheet, and I think I included that as an exhibit. Yeah, so last year, subject property, there's an exhibit here, and it says price per unit, okay? So I've got 0.48 units, so the price per unit is $1,537,929. So it's been reduced from $1,537,929 to this $922,758. And in fact,
So no, I don't think you're looking at the right number, because I have last year's valuation report that was presented at this meeting, and the land value is 922,758. So I'm not sure, I just wanna clarify that, because I want to make sure we're on the same page before I,
if you do the multiplication then of my paper here. Oh,
I think what they're looking at in the packet you gave us.
is, yeah,
So on the first, you have your two-page, you have your memo,
and the
and then
valuation
you have the
report.
subject property 2025, 26, which is this year, the present appeal, and then you have the next page, subject property 2024, 2025. You see that? So we've got-
Is that in their appeal?
So we have
that's the town of Harrison sent that.
We have in the packet that I have that's dated October 29th, 2025, page 74 and 75 of our packet. Do you have that?
No, because I don't have last year's information with me. I mean, I have some of last year's information, but,
Look at, if I can.
sorry.
That's okay, here's 74. This is 74 and 75 of at least what we're looking at.
Kate Monday was
So,
922,758,
if you
it's the
look at-
same.
I'm not saying this is
Yeah,
right or
yeah.
wrong, I'm just trying to,
I just want to make sure that I'm looking at the same, because I don't see a different in land valuation.
All right, look, on this page here that the town of Harrison provided, right? It says price per unit, 900,000.
That's not the value of your land, the land is over on the far right. The
That's
922,758.
the price per unit.
Correct, that's
The
not-
units are acres. So this is the price for an acre that's similar to ours.
let me, if I can, let me just try to, do you have 74 and 75 in front of you?
I do.
Okay, so I'm not saying it's right or wrong, I'm just trying to show you what I think the disconnect is here.
Oh, no, I think
So
And then
on
this is-
25 and 26 under land description, it has a price per unit of $900,000 on page 74. I'll let you look at 74.
Okay, 74.
And I'm
Oh,
not
the
saying
price
this
per
is right or
unit,
wrong,
yeah.
it's just a piece of paper that says for 2020, says valuation report 12/125 under land, it's got a price unit 900,000. And then
Sure.
on page 75, which is dated 1/3/25, it has someone's handwriting on it. Subject
So-
property 24/25,
Yeah.
it says under the land description, it has a land value of a price per unit of $1,537,929.
So, yeah.
All I'm saying is, right or wrong, whatever, what I think the applicant's saying is that was changed too.
Yeah, so I see, I couldn't see where this was coming from, so I want to add,
You sure?
yeah, some explanation, so.
You don't need to,
Yeah, no, I just wanted to make sure that I was knowing where you were referencing, because I wasn't seeing what you were talking about. My only assumption is, and I can't answer if somebody changed the settings in the program that we use, because you can change how things display, whether it be by acre, by fractional acre, you can change how they're displayed. The biggest thing I want to make sure, though, is that when we're looking at the overall land value, nothing changed in the overall values and the underlying cost schedule. I think just the way that these two reports were printed, that price per unit is being displayed differently on both of those reports. They're not different in the underlying cost schedule. So we haven't updated anything in the land cost schedules. This is just the CAMA system that we used, and somebody changed a background, like a printing option when they print. It just printed differently. And I can't answer why they did that. I don't.
Look. Well, last year, I paid on the basis of the 1537, 929. The 0.48 times that, times the 1.25, gave me that 922, 758, which is the same value that I'm looking at this year,
Right.
right?
So-
Although they've changed the price per unit, so that calculation hasn't been done.
We haven't changed the price per unit. That is just it's a display thing that you can change how it displays on that report. So I think what's happening is that report, one of the reports is listed to show you what a 1 acre land is worth. And then they changed the settings in the background, so it changed that price per unit to show fractionally what your acres is worth.
If
But
that
it's
were
not,
true-
it's not a different calculation.
If that were true, then my neighbors who have different fractions of an acre wouldn't have that $900,000 number, but they do.
They would if it's the setting on the computer and the way it's printed.
But they have different fractions of an
The
acre.
fractional acreage is gonna change based on how many acres you have. That's how it,
And what I'm saying is, people with different fractions of an acre in my neighborhood got the same $900,000 printed out on their valuation sheet. So it is not something that's been adjusted for the fractional acreage of the property.
the value of your property, I just wanna make clear, and what I'm just trying to point out is that we have not changed our cost schedules. I'm saying that on oath, we have not changed our cost schedules, we have not changed the value of your land and how we've assessed it. The report may be printing it differently in different ways, but we have not changed anything, okay?
Maybe you as Packer hasn't, but the town has.
No.
Hold on a second. You'll have a chance to rebut.
Right, you need
So
to
let her have
give
the
her a chance
floor.
here.
You know, you don't agree, which is why you're here, obviously, for
Right.
us to decide. So you made your points about the 1.25 and the other point, and so it's your turn.
Okay, so I just wanted to make sure that that was clear, is that we have not changed anything, I think it's a printing error. So to come back to the property, to give a little bit more clarification, again, I was not here last year, Bob was here, so I'm not sure how he presented the case, but one thing I will tell you, so to give you some background information, when we assess a property, we have to look at the improvements to the land. If a property has one well and septic, it's considered one base lot. If there's a property that has 2 well and septics for another house, a second house, it's gonna get 2 base acres. When we have a property that has some kind of functionality in the other buildings, we have to adjust the land value based on the improvements that contribute to getting those utilities to that property. So when you install a bathroom and a shower and all of that stuff into the other unit, there is land costs, there's improvements that need to be made that make the property more valuable, but there's a cost that goes with improving that property to get the water and the electricity and everything else to the second structure. So that's why in a situation where we have another structure that has plumbing, we add a value to the land to show that improved land value, that improvement to the land. So we don't want to assess somebody that has an unattached structure that doesn't have its own well and septic for a full second base acre, because you don't have a second well and septic. You haven't gone through the motions of putting both of those in. You're tying into the existing one, but there's still a cost to do that. So we have to incorporate that cost in the best way we know how. So we say with a property that has more living space in an unattached structure, we have to account for the increase of the land value and the improvements that have gone into it. One thing that, well, a couple of things that are in assessing and appraising is there's 3 approaches to value. There's the cost approach, which you've spoken about. How much does it cost to put in a well and a septic? How much does it cost to put in a foundation? You know, there's cost. There's also the income approach, which is a bit more of a business model, which we wouldn't use on a residential property. And then you have market. So you got to look at, you know, what things are going for on the market. So we have to use the highest and best use based on the information that we have at hand. So that 25% is to not penalize you for a whole second base acre because you don't have that. The 25% is to incorporate the increased cost in the land value and what you have to do in order to get plumbing and everything to that second structure. One property that I included on this worksheet is 7 Lovejoy Island Way, and I've also included maps. I didn't number the pages, but if you go to the maps, so the first one that's for map 13.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
So is this a dwelling unit or not a dwelling unit under the local ordinance? I mean, does it have it doesn't have a kitchen?
So it's a second structure. We don't follow ordinance per se. We have to look at what the improvements are to the property and how it adds value.
You don't know whether is it an ADU?
I don't know if it's an ADU as far as what the legislation states as an ADU. We just look at it as a usable structure that has living quarters.
So if they had built just an addition or just had a breezeway that was 2 feet wide connected to an addition that just added a bedroom
It would still be a second structure with.
If they didn't just a physical addition, it wouldn't be. They did an addition.
If they added it to the existing house.
Yeah.
If it didn't require any land.
They added a 20 by 15 addition on the side.
Yeah, if it didn't require any more land.
They put a crawl space in and added on a bedroom in the back.
Yeah.
With a 3/4 bath. Would that be an additional building, or would that be just an expansion of existing dwelling that would be picked up in the cost approach when you did your building value?
It would be, an attached building would be picked up in the cost approach,
So when you do your highest and best valuation of land, do you look at whether the land can support an additional dwelling unit as a standalone building and then value that into the land value, even if it's not there?
If it's not there, we don't assess for it, no.
But if that's the highest and best use of the land, I mean.
Well, I mean, we could, under the law, we have to use highest and best use, so right now, we have to assess based on the fact that it's used as a separate living quarters, it's got a separate shower and everything. That's the highest and best use. We can't assume that a property, the highest and best use of a property that doesn't have that extra thing, the highest and best use is what's currently there.
And then in the building value, you're valuing the garage as half of a garage space, but the replacement cost for the bedroom would be based on the building permit that was pulled. You'd do the replacement cost for the garage based on.
The cost is based on our cost schedules. So what it would cost, based on our research designed, using Marshall and Swift. Sure. And, creating cost schedules for construction costs, that's all put in there. Then depreciation's added into a structure. If so, for a garage, we give an automatic 20%.
That's in the Marshall and Swift or whatever, that's in your building value.
Yes.
So the assessment captures the value of the improvements made to the garage under the building component. And what you're saying is that in addition to capturing the value of the improvements they made to add a bedroom and a 3/4 bath, inherently the land became more valuable because in an out structure that's not a dwelling, necessarily a dwelling unit or an ADU, they added a bedroom.
And plumbing. They added plumbing and everything, so there's.
They added a plumbing.
Correct.
So is it the plumbing that's the trigger, not the bedroom?
It's the increase, it's the plumbing and everything that incorporates that there's living quarters in a separate structure.
Okay.
Continue.
No, no,
Wait, wait, she's done.
He's not done.
So the other thing I want to point out as well is what we do, so if you look at, what I was going to say before was, if you look at these maps, we've gone through and we've highlighted sales data and information on properties that have improved pieces of property that don't have an additional well and septic. So these are properties that we've applied the 1.25% to. So on the first map, map 13, the subject property is 55, which is in pink, it's kind of up on the top. And the one property, just to point this one out first, which is 7 Lovejoy Island, it's lot 13, map 13, lot 29. It's down near the bottom in yellow. This has 2 structures. Again, we've applied that same factor to it, and it sold for 1.655 in September of '24. The other properties that are listed here are just kind of showing you what things are selling for in the area. I've marked on the properties which properties have those second dwelling units. And the other thing too is that we also have to take into account that a lot of these properties can't add an additional structure because of their restrictions in the shoreline. So we have to include the fact that somebody looking for a property that has more structures that have living quarters in them is a more valuable piece of property because it's on the water and you can't continually add that for any information. Page number 21, again, just has more sales data, goes over all of the different things, and the blue are the ones that have second dwelling units, just to kind of point out what, where these, like the 125 factor is showing up. The sales data is really kind of just to show you what property on the lake is going for. The other thing we don't have from this applicant is that we don't have a value of what their property is. So we've done the best that we could based on the improvements with the property, what we've seen properties with 2 structures sell for. Again, we have to come up with an overall value and we have to figure out a way to give those properties value, breaking down the land and the building. But based on the information and the methodology that we've used, we feel like the value of 103.65 is fair and equitable. We don't see that we're treating them unfairly to any other property that's built in the same capacity. We're making sure that we're treating everybody the same and fair to make sure that they're, not discriminated against. The only other thing, that was brought up was changing the values based on the market, adjusting values. Did you have a question about adjusting things? Did I hear you wrong? I just wanted to make sure I answered a question that you had.
I'm not sure I understand your question.
I thought you had mentioned, I know you had mentioned something about adjusting the land values, but was there a question about adjusting things based on the current market?
Well, yeah, you're telling me that the multiple reports that I have from the town of Harrison that report the value of an acre of property similar to mine are in error, all right? I assumed that the valuation material that the town of Harrison had provided me was accurate. And I actually think that given current market conditions, the 1.5 million for an acre like mine seems to be quite excessive. I'm taking the number the town of Harrison has published and asked for my valuation to be based on the number they've published. All right, so you're telling me it's an error. So that's what I think you're talking about.
I'm not telling you it's an error. I'm telling you it's a different way to print the report. And the other thing is with 7 Lovejoy Island Way, this is showing us that the property, it's sold for 1.655 and we have 1.399 on it. So we're under market on that property that's similar.
So Lovejoy sold, the property is quite different from ours. It has an ADU, we don't, all right? So it's got a unit where you can cook and live in it. We don't, all right? It also is a larger property. It's 0.78 acres where we're 0.48. If you look at, and it's got another 2 acres that are non-shorefront. So if we just look at the shorefront valuation for the acre there, the 1,052,066, divide that by the 0.78, that's got a per acre value of 1,348,803. That's only 70% of my per acre value.
So
So the comps that have been given to me are both have substantially lower land values than what I'm getting hit with.
So the thing to remember in assessing is the base acre is what's called a fractional acre. And that is universal among all assessing practices. A fractional acre is when, the best way to describe it is if you take an acre and it's worth, let's just use this example, $900,000. 1 acre on a waterfront piece of property is going to always be worth $900,000 with, the standard shore frontage. I'm gonna use a rear lot to make it more understandable. You have a 1 acre lot that's worth $900,000, but if you have a 0.9 acre lot, that doesn't mean that it's worth 10% less value. It's a fractional acreage based on a standard calculation that, let's say, 0.9 acres is kind of be probably worth like 0.93% of a full acre. Because just because sometimes you're buying a full acre and then somebody is buying 0.9 acres doesn't make it 10% less usable. So there, in assessing, there's a fractional acreage applied. So if you take the acreage and you just divide it by that land value, it's never gonna equal out mathematically because it's a lot more complicated than just doing a straight division application.
Okay, again, that's at odds with what I've seen with my neighbors who have the similar $900,000 and they have different fractions of an acre. All right, and the 1.25 factor increased the value of our land by $184,000, $184,000. The plumbing, all right? And we're talking not about the plumbing inside the structure because that's in the value of the structures. To connect my garage toilet to the septic system, which is right next to the garage, didn't cost me anywhere near $184,000. I said we had little to no improvement cost to the land. To connect it up was just a couple of $1,000s. It wasn't $184,000.
So I guess the biggest thing is what is the value of your property?
Well, I calculated based upon.
What could you sell your property for?
You'd have to see it.
I don't know, I'm taking the methodology, what I'm saying
He didn't
is.
come in, when he came to do the assessments, I said, do you want to go inside either place? And he said, no, I don't need to. And neither did, we talked about this a little bit last year, even though it's a little bit off the subject, but it fits into everything that you're saying. Our property abuts right away. That is used, there's no structure on it and can't be except for their picnic tables, which really shouldn't be there either, by the way, but the town allows them because nobody wants to enforce it. So there are 20-plus properties across the street on a developed land that purchased that right-of-way. The town wasn't happy about it, but allowed it. It was originally intended for the back lots. I think there are approximately 40 back lots that have the definition of right-of-way to that property, as well as the 20-plus homeowners that get usage of that. And in order to accommodate their boats, the town allowed 2 moorings to go in front of what would be our property. Now, I know we don't own the water, but if you own waterfront property and someone else's boats are right where your boats could be, but ours had to get shifted to in front of our next door neighbors. Does that count for anything?
No, there's more moorings there than the regulations provide. We've complained multiple times to the harbor master. The town of Harrison is unwilling to confront the owners of the right-of-way, and they're giving them more moorings than are allowed. So we've got that, we've got a busy right-of-way where we often see people peeing in the woods. These are things that would negatively affect our value. So I'm actually pretty comfortable with the idea that I could sell this house for the $875,000. I do not think I could come close to selling it for $1,365,800.
It was originally a summer camp that somebody then lifted up and put a partial basement under. It's not a functional basement. Most people can't fully stand up, but it's great that it's there. So it wasn't insulated, it didn't have heat, so we made some of those improvements, but the structure still looks like the original camp. Somebody later added a 4-car garage, 2 at road level, go down a steep driveway, turn around, 2 under. And we turned one of the upper bays, because it wasn't all concrete, where the kids were already sleeping, we put walls up and the toilet and shower in. So I don't know how valuable that property is. Most people said to us when they came and looked at it all around us is, you guys have a vision, we would have bought this property. So I don't know.
So we have to go with the best market data we have. So.
The best market data should take those factors into account, the terrain of the property, the right-of-way next to it. It's not an ADU. Can't rent it, we wouldn't want to. I don't think anybody would want to rent a bedroom in a detached with no kitchen facilities or whatnot. I don't think it should be considered the same as some of the properties that literally have a separate living space. Nobody needs to come into your house, not even your adult kids and their babies, to use the kitchen and whatnot, so.
And we seem to be agreeing that it would be appropriate to increase the value of an improved piece of property if you had to make some additional improvements. But this 25% factor, this ratio doesn't make sense applying it to a house like ours where we had little or no cost of land improvements to do what we did, to a place that has to make significant improvements to the property to build a whole separate cottage or living space or dwelling. Using a single percent of 25% doesn't make sense. It doesn't accurately reflect this link that we agree is there between the value of an improved property and the cost of the improvements that have been made.
But it could make it more valuable. It's not a direct link as to cost. It's all marketability, how valuable it makes a property.
I
So
agree, there is a link between the amount, the cost of the improvements and the value of the improved property. The 25% factor has got no relationship at all to what the credible evidence from the marketplace as to what that link looks like.
the only other thing I want to share, and this is under property tax abatement law under Maine Revenue Services, is that it does state that when it is impossible to secure both the standards of a just value and equity required by the Constitution, the duty to assess on just value yields to the duty to avoid discrimination. Equity trumps just value. So the biggest thing is we need to make sure that when we're assessing properties, we're using the same methodology when we've done an overall study based on the market data, the information that we have at hand, and what we believe is the best practice for properties that have additional structures, that have additional improvements and living quarters. And I'm not saying that it's a rentable property. It could be used as an Airbnb. I don't know if you have to have you don't have to have a kitchen to have an Airbnb. But we have to look at the improvements and what we believe it can be marketably, sold for, or as close as we can to make sure we're treating it fairly and equitably. And we believe that we've used a percentage that's fair and equitable, used for the same purposes. We're not giving everybody an additional acre for a second structure. We're just increasing the property value by a little bit just to make sure that we're capturing the use of another structure for living quarters. And we believe that the 1.365,800 is appropriate as an overall value based on the methodology we've used.
Okay.
Just one
Thank
last
you.
comment.
We'll go back to you now.
$184,000 isn't a little bit.
Well, you keep saying living quarters, and it's not living quarters.
It's sleeping quarters.
Sleep
Sleeping
and shower and.
And you can't eat. So you gotta eat to live. So it's not a livable It's not living quarters, it's sleeping quarters.
It's developed property.
Yeah, it's developed property, I think is where we have a little
Yeah.
disconnect. Once that you've done anything in a separate unit, they are trying to just across the board, they can't go to each little thing in each property, they're not gonna do that. And they're saying, once you did that, it's at the 125, okay? Whether, and they're not saying it's an ADU, I don't believe.
No,
I mean, they're just saying it's a separate unit, it's got some improvements to it, and unfortunately, you're getting caught up in the average that they're doing to everybody, okay? That's what she's trying to say, I think, that's all.
And just a quick response to that, which is, for things that really matter to valuation, things that do make a big difference, like this 25% factor, there is differentiation for important things. How much of shoreland, yardage do you have, or footage, right? Because that's really important if you've got 100 feet or 200 feet. Things that are important determinants of value, you do spend time creating some differentiation. And all of a sudden now, we've got this average of 25% increase on your land value, and there's no differentiation for somebody like us that does little or no improvement costs to somebody that's adding a whole second living dwelling. That's not right.
It's hard that
It's
it's
not
not one
fair.
size
But we
fits all.
don't, we haven't received information showing that our methodology is not giving us an accurate value.
I just gave you 4 pieces of evidence.
We don't know the value of your property on an open market, and I've shown you other properties that have been on the open market that have sold for, different amounts. And we do not have something showing that that is inappropriate for your property.
What you would expect an assessor to be able to do is to look at this sample of properties and be able to, and there are statistical methods that allow you to do this, and take the characteristics of the property and determine how much each one of those characteristics influences the value of that property. And that statistical analysis you could test as to whether a property that's got these characteristics uniformly shows a 25% increase. And I can guarantee you it won't. And if you want to say that this is properly valued, then you need to show me, here's what additional acreage adds, here's what an additional bathroom adds, here's what an additional bigger driveway would add. You've done none of that. You've just given me a whole bunch of properties that aren't necessarily similar to ours and say, look, some of them are higher than yours, some of them are lower than yours, yours must be okay. That's not right.
Take a deep breath.
All right, I'm sorry,
I understand what
yep.
you're saying, but I don't want to get too personal here. We don't need to do that. How about any other questions? I'm going to switch to the board. I think you've made your
I do have a
point.
question.
Yes.
So related to the, you had referenced an opinion related to the value of the home. When it was appealed last year, we overturned and went back and said 184,000 was granted. Was that updated or were any adjustments made?
No, because, so the abatement was granted, yes.
Yeah.
But every year is a new assessment year.
Yeah.
And based on the abatement granted, we didn't have any, looking at the data that we have, we can't change their property and change the value of the other properties, because then that creates an inequity. So you agreed with the applicant based on the percentage methodology. But in changing that, we couldn't take the 25% away from them and then take the 25% away from everybody else that we had applied it to, because then that creates inequity with them, because it's now lowering their assessments and they're now going all so far under market value that we'd have to go around the entire town, every single property in the town, and change any property that has a separate structure that has no plumbing, and change everybody. And that, based on the market data that we have, that we've collected, that we've researched, that would then lower all of those other properties. So for us to change it for this property, we felt it's inappropriate to do that because it creates an inequity in our assessing model on how we've treated all of the properties that are similarly designed like that. And I don't think your when I say this, I think your direction is to, you've granted the abatement, but your direction isn't necessarily what that value should be, or what that percentage should be, or what our methodology should be on how to apply that. So based on what we come back to, we have to still use the best methodology that we have available to us.
So each year is a separate assessing year anyways, but, you know, when I looked at the denial letter, again, I'm a little confused. The assessors stand by the methodology used for multi-dwelling lots. 2 comparable lots are 7 Lovejoy and 530 and Cape Monday, which sold for whatever. Each of these parcels has an ADU. And what you're saying is that it doesn't matter whether they have an ADU or a dwelling unit. And dwelling unit, you've got a shoreline zoning under Maine law. The dwelling unit has a kitchen, bathroom, and a bedroom to be a dwelling unit. And so when I see the word multi-dwelling lots, and I'm seeing ADU, in my mind, when I read this before today, I was thinking, oh, they don't have a dwelling unit, they don't have an ADU. The 1.25 is derived from sales of lots that have ADUs and dwelling units. So why is the 1.25 being applied here? And so that's what I thought when I came in here. You come in and say, no, it's not the ADU, it's not the dwelling unit, it just says plumbing. If you have a plumbing, but I guess the question is, if the sales that you relied upon to extract the 1.25 or all deal with had dwelling units, had ADUs, why is it then linked to plumbing and not just linked to whether the accessory building or structure is an ADU or a dwelling unit, and apply the 1.25? You got clearly have sales that, or you have properties that have that have, you know, they've been renovated to be a dwelling unit. And, you know, it just seems to me that if they just added an addition on with a, you know, a toilet, they hooked the line into the existing system and it was physically connected to the house, there wouldn't be, it's not a dwelling unit, it's not a standalone, it doesn't make it multi-dwelling lot. And, you know, I'm just a little, I'm still trying to figure out how this fits in to the paradigm of ADUs and a dwelling unit, just because, and they didn't do a new septic system. They did, you know, when you get a plumbing permit, they size it based on, you have a kitchen. You know, this is just like adding a bedroom where, you know, if they just added the bedroom, the plumbing inspectors wouldn't require them to, you know, if the septic system's not failing, they wouldn't have to upgrade the septic system. But it, you know, may be different if they were, anyways, it's just, it's not clear cut to me and again, I understand about the value, I understand that to be just doing an unjust discrimination, saying they just have me classified wrong. That's all. We should be classified as a non-ADU, non-dwelling unit, because that's not what we have. We just have a bedroom when we hooked into the existing plumbing system. And the denial letter doesn't say, we treated you the same as everybody who just has a plumbing permit. It said multi-dwelling unit and ADU.
So I think there's a disconnect so the towns type the letters and send those out. And we try to guide them on what to say. I think where the term ADU is, the definition of ADU is not what we use in assessing. We don't put a valuation on a separate building or structure if it's an ADU versus a bedroom and a bathroom. Like, we're not looking at it. We don't put anywhere in our assessing on a property card ADU. We don't use those terms. We use terms where, you know, is there finished quarters over a garage? Is there a second structure that's been finished? And I know that letter says ADU, but I just want to be clear that 125% is applied to any property that has plumbing and livable quarters. I don't mean like rental, full-time living, like you can sleep in it, you can shower in it. Any structure that has separate improvements to it has that added 25%.
I get that.
Yeah.
The letter that was the denial letter says, the assessors stand by the methodology used for multi-dwelling lots. That's what it said. It didn't, the 2 comparables had ADUs. And so we feel that we treated you fairly because you fall in the category of a multi-dwelling lot, and we're gonna treat you like you have an ADU. I think that's a fair reading of this. I understand what you're telling me
Yeah.
now. Just saying, this is from the assessors.
Right.
This is what the assessor said. That's all. It's just, anyways.
That's actually what Bob said last year as well, that you can live in that unit. That's what he kept saying. He didn't say plumbing, because you had to hook in, didn't say any of that. He said, you've got a property that's improved because somebody can stay there. Who, I don't know, can live there, but that's what he said. They're different than what you're saying now.
So if I have a home occupation and I want to convert my garage into a workshop for, I like to paint, so I'm gonna paint, and I want a sink because I want to be able to wash my hands and whatever. So is that gonna be treated as an ADU or as a dwelling unit, because I pulled a
Not gonna be,
separate
again,
permit?
we're, in assessing, we don't use ADU or dwelling, and I know that the letter states that. We would list it as 125, well, depending upon the town and the market data that we collect. I shouldn't say for Harrison, we've used 125. We would put that value on there based on if the property, if it's unattached and it's got additional plumbing added to it. We're gonna put an additional factor on the land, giving that separate property an added value to the property.
And at the same time, under the building component of the property card, there's an element of $5,000 or $6,000 for the plumbing that's been added, right, too?
For the fixtures.
Yeah.
Inside the property, not the plumbing, not the actual roughed in plumbing.
When I look at so when this has plumbing fixtures.
It's
this is for the
fixtures, so
separate
like a
property.
toilet, a sink, a shower, those are actual
It has
fixtures.
Plumbing fixtures 2021, which is, I assume, when they added the plumbing, $7,895. Isn't that the plumbing that?
That's the fixtures. That's the valuation of the fixtures.
So what's the difference between the value of the plumbing fixtures and the value of the plumbing?
So when you assess a house, like if somebody were building a house right now, we'd have to go assess based on what's there. If there's roughed in plumbing, and the land is improved and all the plumbing is there, we give it a percentage of how finished the structure is. So if you have a house that you're building isn't 100% finished, it's just studs, we have different percentages based on how finished it is. If the plumbing's roughed in, it has an additional percentage for the roughed in internal plumbing. And then once we figure out how many fixtures there are, you add the fixtures. So you could have, bathrooms that have double vanities. You could have bathrooms that have a stand-up shower and a soaking tub. All those additional fixtures, once we know what's installed, get a value placed on those as well.
But that's in the
I
structure.
have, hold on. So if I have an outside shower attached to my garage, I run a pipe, seasonal pipe,
Yep.
I'm gonna get hit with a 1.25.
On your house?
No, my land.
But
So if I run a pipe over to I have a standalone garage and I want an outdoor shower, because I like to take a shower outside.
no, because that's not creating another set of living quarters, a place where you can finish.
No living quarters, I just I extend my plumbing.
That's not.
I hire a plumber, gets a permit, I want to extend the line.
No. Because there's no more living quarters. It doesn't make the property that much more valuable just because you piped in an outside shower to another building.
I thought you said if I pull plumbing into an accessory structure, I get hit with the 1.25.
You do, into a building that creates other living places to live and sleep. It adds value. This is a value that we're adding. It's not a straight cost. It's not a dollar for dollar. If you're bringing over plumbing over the ground for an outside shower, that's going to be an extra fixture. But if you're improving another structure on the property for living quarters, it adds value, and that's how we're adding that additional value for that second structure.
And if you had any properties that have sold where you had a sale where it wasn't an ADU, it wasn't an additional dwelling unit, as that term is commonly understood, it wasn't multi-dwelling unit, it wasn't an ADU, that you could look at to say that sale falls in the category of 1.25 because they had a bathroom in the garage.
So I'd have to look through these other ones included.
So in other words, what if they came in and said, you know what, we got rid of the bedroom, we still have the toilet, we're just using the bedroom as to store our boat and our life preservers, and so it's not a bedroom anymore. We got the toilets there, just somebody's out there working in the garage, they can go to the bathroom.
Is the property still finished, though? Is it still a finished property that could be used as a bedroom, or?
You just said they don't use highest and best use, you use current use.
No, I said we use highest and best use. I said, that's what I said.
So if I have an existing garage and I could add plumbing to it, you're not assessing me at my land at high and best use, because I haven't done it, but I could. Right? I mean, if I,
It's the overall improvement to that second structure. So yes, it's including the plumbing and everything, and including it's including the finish of that second structure. It's not just plumbing to a garage. It's the overall added value of all of the improvements.
so if I have their property, and I haven't done anything yet, but I could just run plumbing and put a toilet in it, why wouldn't the land be assessed at that highest and best value if that's what I could
Because
do?
it's not there yet. We can't assess, highest and best use is what it can currently be used
I
at.
understand that, I totally understand
If
that.
you don't have that structure there, the highest and best use is what the structure is as of that point in time. So if there's no structure, the highest and best use is the property as it stands right then and there. So if you have a structure that has been finished off, its highest and best used is as additional sleeping and showering quarters, or that's its highest and best use.
No, I understand
Yeah.
that. So you don't, okay. I'm being-
Other questions from the board? Anything?
No
Too much?
questions, no.
Nope.
Anything here? Any further comments that you might have?
I'll
Before
try
we
to keep it
close?
short, and I'll try to take a deep breath. There's a couple of points here I just wanted to weigh in on. One is this argument that if they stopped the discrimination that we're facing because we're not paying based upon our market value, if they were to relieve that discrimination, they wouldn't want to relieve that discrimination for everybody else, so that they want to, because relieving us of the discrimination and keeping the discrimination for other people would lead to discrimination. This is circular reasoning. It doesn't make any sense. This shouldn't happen. This 1.25 non-market-based factor shouldn't be applied to anybody. Everybody should be paying based upon the market value, and an appropriate adjustment for the degree of improvement on land, and they'll just have to reset the tax rate to get the target revenue if everybody's fairly valued. So that doesn't make any sense. And this fixture question, the value of the toilets and the shower and the faucets and everything is something we're already paying for, because that's part of the value of the structure, not the land.
Not in assessing.
Well,
I don't want to get in an argument.
okay,
Just,
all right,
you know, I understand.
I assume it is.
I understand your philosophy, I understand where you're going. Unfortunately, your philosophy doesn't match what they do, okay? I mean, if you were talking to me as a real estate broker appraiser, I would be looking at every little thing and just what you're talking about. But that isn't what they do. And I understand your frustration to say, well, why the hell don't you do it that way? Well, because they don't, okay? So they treat everybody this way, whether we like it or not, okay? And I'm not trying to.
No, it's how we're directed
It
by
is what it
law.
is, but I understand your frustration, but we're trying to compare your philosophy of kind of apples with the oranges of what they do, okay? And I can feel for where you're at. It doesn't make individual sense for your property and each individual property, but they can't do that. So that's just my comment.
My understanding is the law in Maine is we ought to pay taxes based upon market value. That's my argument.
Well, I wouldn't push that real hard, because the overall value they have, you may think they wouldn't sell for that, but I think you probably would be wrong, okay? It's crazy what the market is, you'd be shocked.
Not when they see our tax bill.
I know what you're saying. But anyways, back, Jennifer, did you have any other comments that you want to give us and all? And before I close it, I tried to before,
Yeah,
but.
my only thing is that, we believe that our methodology gives us a good assessment on the property. We don't think that our methodology is giving them an unfair assessment, and we, regardless of the methodology that we use, we believe it's brought us to the proper value.
Can I just ask
Okay.
curiosity, do other towns surrounding us, I don't believe they do the 1.25 factor.
I can't answer for other
But in other
towns
words, it's not
because we do
standard.
37 towns in the state of Maine. So there are some towns,
Some,
but it's not necessarily 125 in every town. It's all based on market data. And if we put a factor on land to make sure it's fairly and equitable to other properties that have sold that are similar, we make sure that it's falling in line with what the market's telling us. So it's adjusted based on the town.
Just curious.
I'm gonna close out the hearing. I think we've heard about everything we can possibly hear. And we're just gonna have the discussion between, the board at this point and try to come to some conclusion. Let's just go around. Peter, maybe, what's some of your thoughts, about, where we are?
Yeah, I think all towns, in my experience, use factors, and when you do a town-wide evaluation, you have to have some sort of methodology, so I get it. And the 25%, 1.25 factor probably works in 90 whatever percent of properties. So if you have a land valuation of a cape that has a separate 24 by 24 garage that has an apartment over it, and the land valuation is $100,000, and you do a land factor of 1.25, it adds $25,000 to that property, plus the valuation of the structure. So I think in the vast majority of cases, the adding a 1.25 probably works. But then when you get into these price points where the land value is higher, and it suddenly stops. And I just refer them as outlier properties, where the methodology works most of the time, but you have particular properties that it just doesn't work. And I think it's true in every town. And anytime there's a unique property, you just can't apply a town-wide factor necessarily to these unique and uniquely situated properties. Especially when you consider that it's not an ADU, it's a bay of a garage that was probably drywalled and a 3/4 bath added. So, and if you have a starting land value of, say, $700,000 and add 25% of that, it's not reflective. So the methodology that they use, I think, is equitable until it reaches a point, and then just these outlier properties make it unequitable. So I think the valuation, the abatement request amount is just not realistic, to be honest. I wouldn't vote for the amount requested, but I'm inclined to consider an amount that would be more reflective of what the value of the second structure would be on the property. Because it's just, I think in this scenario, when it's this high of land value, it doesn't work.
Yeah. Good point. Thank you. David, what do you think?
Well, I understood this to be an unjust discrimination appeal, so not an overvaluation appeal, and I still think that's how I hear things. And so when I read everything, I've said this, when I read the denial letter, I was saying, oh, they treated it as a multi-dwelling unit ADU, and it's not an ADU, they got it classified wrong, it should be at 1.25. So that's what I thought, coming in and then hearing what they had to say, and then I listened to what you're saying, and what I guess I'm hearing is there's a base lot value of $900,000, and that base lot assumes that the lot's buildable, assumes a septic and water for a dwelling unit or for a house. And that the way the assessors adjust for additional underground plumbing fixtures may not be a separate, subsurface wastewater disposal system, but a separate building hooked into the, as opposed to one building being hooked in, is you do a 1.25 and you derive that from seeing sales of dwelling units and ADUs. So that's kind of what I understand you did. And you say that in reality, you're not just doing it to ADUs and standalone dwelling units, you're doing it to anybody who pulls a plumbing permit to run it to an accessory structure. And, if they just built an addition, it wouldn't change anything, but what changes it is they're running into an additional structure, which increases the potential use of that structure, which makes somehow the land more valuable back to the sales of the ADUs and multi-dwelling units, right? So I don't know.
Yeah,
But that's all I'm saying right now.
okay, that's good, yeah, thank you.
So I kind of go back
Yeah.
to, this is a better explanation of this additional unit and the plumbing involved, because last year, as Bob, he explained specifically it was ADUs and needing to have what I perceived as, and even the other comps that were provided show an ADU. They show an apartment-like in-law apartment, what you would envision. So, and I'm glad you pointed out that letter too. It specifically states, I understand there's maybe a disconnect between your team and who at the town actually sends one out, but you provided more clarity around what actually classifies in this 125%. But I'm still at a point where I don't agree with the full abatement of 490,000, but I go back to what we had decided last year. I don't see that, I see that it is unjust in that, especially given the examples that were provided, the letter that was provided, and you had a different explanation, better explanation, but I still go back to what we had decided last year and providing, accepting the 184,000, not applying the 125% for what I view as a converted garage, and it is sleepable space, but I kind of just, where I'm at is going back to what we had decided last year. I haven't been persuaded otherwise.
Okay, thank you. I too have a problem with the $490,800. I don't see any way we're gonna go there, at all. I do feel that there is some injustice here because it is just a garage with some sleeping quarters and a shower, okay? I think you're getting hit pretty hard, okay, for that. But I understand how you have to use kind of an overall average, and some properties, like Peter mentioned, get caught in this stuff, okay? And we're here to see if we can maybe fix it a little bit, okay? But we certainly can't go against your overall philosophy, because then it would be, I think, very discriminatory on just this one property if we went to that whole 490,000. I just don't see that. But I would entertain, something less than that, probably nearer what we did the last time to offset some of this, but that's where I'm at. So, yep. So, further discussion, suggestions, motion, anything from you folks?
Well, I guess I agree with the comment on I don't see a basis to reduce it to 400, whatever that number is. I think if there's anything that's on this, does it fall within kind of this category or that category type of thing?
Yeah, I kind of think there should be, some other category that should have been created, I think, than just the 125 across the board. Because once you get to a certain point, as Peter mentioned, you need another factor. I mean, you need to say, wait a minute, okay? This isn't the same as all the other ones. That's where I'm at. To say, why wouldn't it be some other factor there, okay? Then, it's gonna be up to us to try to figure out what the hell that is.
And I thought when I read the denial letter, that what they were identifying as the factor was a dwelling unit.
Right.
That's what was making this land more valuable, and they pointed to the two sales with added ADUs as supporting why they were treated the way they were treated.
Right.
And that's what was the disconnect for me.
Yeah. Yeah. So, what do you think, Peter? You wanna make a motion and we'll throw it around, or?
Yeah, I did put a cheat sheet on these, on the third option, which is not agreeing to the $490,800 reduction, but rather, it was 922,800 last year as well as the land, is that right? Is that what we got the 184, 594? Yeah, so it would be, the preponderance of evidence is that it's an unjust discrimination because the factor incorrectly applied is what I would suggest is.
I agree with
what
that.
comes into play here, which lands.
Second?
I second.
And explain your motion again, or your rationale for what you're saying?
That the preponderance of evidence demonstrated that the 1.25 factor applied resulted in unjust discrimination to the applicant, and that I'm suggesting a reduction in assessed value of $184,594.
Which reflects an application of 1.0 factor as opposed to 1.25.
Sounds good.
Yep.
Okay, and you seconded that?
I second.
Yeah, and you're getting it down, understand, okay. Other comments about the motion?
What do you want to say for evidence?
No, I just, it's the unjust discrimination. I'll go with it. I mean, I understand the explanation offered tonight, when I just gonna, I go by what they said they did. And I understand what you're saying, but you're an assessor's agent, and this is from the assessors. And in the assessor's mind, this is what they did and the justification for what they did. And to me, if that is in fact what they did and the basis for what they did, there's a discrimination here in this, not intentional, it's just by classification, that this property should be, based on this rationale, should be classified not as a multi-unit dwelling unit, not as an ADU, because it isn't. And, unless and until the town decides to make it clearer what the classification is based on, this classification doesn't support the treatment of this taxpayer in that classification. I guess that's how I look at it.
Yeah.
I'm just going by what they.
Yeah, no, absolutely. May I ask?
They're the assessors, so.
Sure, and can I ask a question?
Sure.
No, sorry.
We're voting.
I
So
understand
I'll support the motion.
Okay, any other questions? I also will support the motion. And then, let's restate that again. It's for the, what we granted before, the abatement amount?
Yeah, reduction in assessed value of $184,594.
Right. Okay, everybody understand motion and justification?
Yep.
Okay, all in favor? Unanimous? That's it? That's the best we can do for you, pal.
Okay, thank you,
That's
guys.
great, thank you guys for showing up tonight. This isn't fun for any of you either, we know.
Executive session.
We're gonna let you all go because we have to go into an executive committee meeting. So, thank you all,
For
and
letting me borrow that.
You can hold on to this.
Oh, I have it at the town, I just didn't have it for tonight, thank you.
we'll be writing within,
Yes, you'll get letters on
within,
both.
So, just one quick question. So,
She's more
review request for property tax abatement pursuant to 36 MRSA 41-2 and 1 MRS 4056F. And we need to record the vote and the time of going into executive session.
Second.
So you have it at 7:30, whatever.
Yeah,
31.
you've got that, right?
Yeah.
Okay, all in favor? Unanimous. Okay, so we're into that